The founder of Church's Chicken and John the Baptist have a lot in common. Over 50 years ago, David Bamberger sold his chicken franchise and used that money to buy 5,500 acres of barren land in the hill country of Texas. Today, that barren land is fertile ground. 2,000 years earlier, John the Baptist appears on the scene as the voice of one crying out, not in an oasis, but in the desert. He prepares the way of the Lord in a barren land. His mission to make the wasteland God's highway, the rugged land a plain, the rough country a broad valley. David Bamberger and John the Baptist do what seems nearly impossible, highly unlikely. Today we continue our Advent homily series, ETA. Christ is coming over at the end of the ages, and he gives us no ETA. In the meantime, though, he comes in very predictable, super unsurprising ways. Last week we saw how Christ comes in worship. How he places the baseball bat in our hands, places his hands around our hands, and together we swing. That's what worship is. We saw how Christ rends the heavens and comes down in every act of worship. On this second Sunday of Advent, we turn to another way that Christ comes: confession. In confession, God turns the deserts of our hearts into fertile ground. This morning, let's take David Bamberger and John the Baptist as our guides as we make this second leg of our Advent journey. In 1969, David Bamberger's 5,500 acres had not a single drop of water. He drilled 7 500-foot wells, nothing. And so he set to work. He cleared cedar, he planted native grasses. These grasses captured water, and their root systems led that water to the large but dry aquifer on his property. 2.5 years later, the first spring appears, and then another, eventually 11. These springs begin to sustain the life of plants and animals, even the nearby city of Austin. From 50 species of birds to 213 species of birds. From 55-pound bucks to 115-pound bucks. Even in the most severe droughts, the most important springs have never run dry. The wilderness exalts. The parched land rejoices and blooms. God appoints John the Baptist for a similar mission: to change the desert of Israel's heart into fertile ground. Throughout the book of Isaiah, over and over and over again, God declares that he will make the wilderness bloom. Isaiah chapter 29, verse 17, "Surely in a little while Lebanon shall be changed into an orchard, the orchard into a forest." Isaiah 33:15, "The wilderness will become a garden land." Isaiah 35, 1-2, "That land will exult, rejoice, and bloom." Isaiah 41, 18-19. Isaiah 43, 19-20. Isaiah 55, 13. You get the picture. The wilderness shall bloom. What seems nearly impossible, what seems highly unlikely, John the Baptist begins and Christ finishes. The wasteland becomes God's highway, the rugged land a plain, the rough country a broad valley. What David Bamberger did in Texas, What John the Baptist did in Israel, God wants to do for us in confession. Again, confession times are no surprise. They never catch us off guard. 30 minutes before every Mass, an hour and a half on Wednesday nights during Advent, 30 minutes on Thursday night. If we do not meet Christ there, we will not meet him when he comes at the end of the ages. Again, like last week, it starts with showing up. 2 reasons why we don't show up to confession. 1, we believe we're too big a desert for God to transform. I'm too lifeless. I'm too sinful. I'm beyond transformation. We call this despair, a sin against the virtue of hope. God's not powerful enough to work in me. I'm too sinful for God to work. We don't show up because we think we're too big a desert, or we don't show up because we've made peace with our desert. That 5,500 acres in Texas, it had been barren for a while, and previous owners didn't seem to care. You can go online today and you can see what David Bamberger's farm looks like. You can see the fence line, his property adjacent to another property, and how stark the difference is. We've made peace with our desert. I can get through life as a desert. I can do okay at my job. I can be mediocre in family life. We're like functional addicts. I'm a highly functioning desert. We call that presumption. Another sin against hope. Taking God's offer of salvation for granted. Whether we think we're too big a desert, or that being a desert is okay. In both, we forget the peace that God has in store for us. It starts with showing up. I don't care if it's been a year, 5, 10, 20, 40. I don't care if you don't know the steps. I don't care if you get them right. God wants you there. I want you there. To transform that desert of your heart into the fertile ground God desires. To be prepared for Christ's unexpected coming at the end of the ages, we need to enter into his very predictable, super unsurprising arrival in confession. John the Baptist's ministry doesn't begin in an oasis. It begins in the desert. Christ comes not to call the righteous, but sinners. If David Bamberger can transform 5,500 acres of earth, how much more can God transform our hearts? He won't do it against our wills. He needs us to bring him our desert in confession.